Tips from Trestle is brought to you by eMenu Choice Point of Sale, Wiseox AI, and Benny Keith Foods. Welcome to Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality Podcast. This podcast explores the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and the community experience. I'm your host, Aaron Fish. My goal for this podcast: educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living. How? By bringing the resident and customer experience to the front of mind in our industry. We should bring the passionate spirit of food and hospitality to everything that we do and everyone we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. Today on Tips from Trestle, I'm joined by Chef Matthew Thompson. Chef Thompson is a nationally recognized culinary executive known for his progressive, sustainable approach to menu development and hospitality. As the Chief Culinary Officer at Restaura, he champions culinary artistry, responsible sourcing, and innovative dining experiences for senior living communities. With over 25 years of leadership, Chef Matthew has advanced plant-based and wellness-focused initiatives in partnership with leading organizations and industry networks. He is also an award-winning sustainability advocate and a frequent speaker on the future of food systems and healthy aging. Chef, thanks for being here today on Tips from Trestle.
Thank you, Aaron. It's a pleasure to be here.
I am looking forward to our conversation. A lot of exciting stuff that you and the team over at Restaura are doing. And so where I want to start is you have a long background in food and culinary, a really distinguished career. You came from a commercial background into senior living with this position. So tell us a little bit about your role. What was the inspiration for the co-founders to create Restaura, and how is what you guys do different from other third-party providers in the senior living space?
Absolutely. I've been working in contract food for the vast majority of my career, really at the intersection of sustainable foods and nutrition, obviously celebrating the culinary crafts. And Restaura was born from that. We brought together quite a few industry experts and tons of experience. And really, we looked at creating something that would disrupt the status quo of senior living dining today and really think differently about dignity, wellness, and hospitality. Restaura was founded on three core pillars. Of course, the first being culinary. We wanted to make sure that we are offering inspired restaurant-style food experiences, but we also want to think about wellness forward, not just, health compliant and checking the box, but really bringing that ingredient first and thinking intently about nutrient density. For us, it's always about telling the story. Why did we select certain things? Let's be very intentional about how we source the ingredients. Let's always ensure that we're putting the resident first from a culinary perspective. So pillar number one for Restaura was on the culinary experience. Secondarily, we think that this is unique in the marketplace. This is the first time a contract food organization actually offers employee ownership. So with Restaura, we've carved out 30% of the organization for our employees to become owners. We do refer to them as that. We call them owners.
Yeah.
So right down to the dishwasher level, folks are joining and they actually have an ownership stake. And that challenges each of us to think differently about the way we're making decisions and engaging with our residents and our clients on a daily basis. And the last pillar is around technology and thinking about always leading with data-driven approaches in the way that we think about technology.
I love those pillars because the work I do for consulting is, I think, very similar in the mindset of we have to think differently about how senior living does it. When I talk to people about contract management, I always talk about it with a grain of salt because I've experienced it. I've taken over operations from it. And you're right. There's always just something that needs a little extra oomph when it comes to that. And so when we connected, I was really excited because I did do a little research and this is something to keep an eye on. I think this might be, like you said, a different way. And I love your approach. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is one of the projects you guys have been working on. And it's this collaboration you have with the International Council on Active Aging to start really looking at not just how you guys support your clients, but how can the industry grow? How can we be better? How do we do things better? And you're working with them to create the culinary and hospitality standards of excellence. And so I'd love to get a little backstory on how this kind of came about.
Yeah, so we are super excited about this partnership and being able to deliver these industry first standards. It started really when we began Restaura. We started looking around and said, well, how do we benchmark ourselves? What are the standards of the industry, and who do we work with in terms of making sure that we're developing something at the top tier of the industry? And we looked around and we really couldn't find anything. I mean, there's a lot of hospitality resources that we could adapt specifically for senior living, but nothing specifically driven for senior living. So what we did is we partnered up with Colin and the team over at the International Council on Active Aging and said, well, how about we develop these standards? We looked at their website, and they currently had a self-assessment that was focused primarily on wellness.
Yeah.
And, we went to Colin and the team and we said, what if that, not just to be about wellness, but the comprehensive culinary approach and the intersection of culinary and care, and how can we weave these things together and really help elevate standards? Selfishly, we wanted to benchmark ourselves and to say, what do we need to do to make sure we're at the top of the tier? But I think more comprehensively, we see it as our goal to help elevate the entire industry, regardless of whether they're a Restaura partner or if they're a self-op or even working with another contractor. How can we really help push the industry forward? And we got together and said, let's look at the gaps, let's look at the opportunities and see what we can do the collaborative environment to help push this thing forward. And ultimately, we came up with close to 100 different standards, all different categories, whether it's around wellness or sourcing or, resident sentiment and feedback and the menu development process. And we really thought we put together a comprehensive group of standards and a number of different pathways for communities to engage, whether it's a benchmarking activity where they want to see how a particular community stands up against either others in the region or nationally, what have you. And then all the way up to a full plate of distinction, which will create a nationally recognized program for meeting certain thresholds and criteria.
Yeah, I love this comprehensive approach. I've always, as a professional in senior living, struggled with not just what should the standards be, how do I bring my hospitality background into senior living, but where do I even start? Because senior living, when you think of the Venn diagram of healthcare and hospitality, they're very separate when they think about their own standards, but we live in the middle in that kind of big overlap. And so seeing this and talking to you about it really is exciting to know, okay, there are other people besides myself out there thinking about how could we really make an impact. And I love that you guys are putting a little more of your weight behind it being a bigger organization. And so I'd love to kind of maybe have you walk me and the listeners through kind of the 5 core domains. I think giving that bigger picture will help us understand how you're approaching this and why ICAA thinks this is such a worthy endeavor on their part.
Technology continues to drive changes in senior care, and that includes food service. eMenu Choice is an award-winning point-of-service application for managing the dining function in senior living communities. This mobile, touchscreen-enabled software enhances the dining experience for residents while streamlining processes for staff. The flexibility and functionality of eMenu Choice makes it an effective solution for any type of senior living environment, from independent and assisted living to skilled nursing facilities. It works for production kitchens or restaurant-style service with options for per meal or a la carte pricing and accommodates a variety of payments, including bill to account, meal credits, and credit cards. Created by a senior care provider with more than a century of experience serving older adults, eMenu Choice eliminates communication barriers between staff and residents while enabling person-centered choices and greater resident satisfaction. eMenu Choice, transforming dining for senior living.
Yeah, so ironically, we've been talking a lot about culinary through this conversation so far. And, when I talk to most people, they just assume that, oh, of course, it's culinary first. And, when we took a step back and said, well, let's look at the industry, I found it was very rarely culinary first. There was a lot of other priorities that went in front of that, whether it was diet and lifestyle or cost or all these other sort of things that found their way out in front of it. And there were always ways that we thought about, well, is it cost? Is it investment? Is it really going to impact the way that we think about census and attracting residents to our community and all of those other sorts of things? So we really felt that culinary excellence and food quality had to be the number one standard. So we put that out there. And just to double click in a couple of the details below that culinary excellence and food quality, certainly an emphasis on scratch cooking. We recognize that residents want to embrace whole foods. They want to recognize the labels. They don't want things out of a package or pre-cooked. They want that restaurant style experience. Something that emphasizes creativity and diversity of menus and global flavors and chef artistry. Of course, to embrace all of that, we have to think about training and the culinary equipment that our kitchens are comprised of, how are meals being served. And frankly, we've had a lot of conversation about this, like, let's just look at the IL side because that's most straightforward. And he said, no, we have to really look at this as a comprehensive approach for the community, not just on, the straightforward IL component, which is the main dining room. We have to look across the continuum of care and say, how can we really leverage this experience, whether you're in IL, AL, assisted living, memory care, yet wherever you are in that continuum of care, we need to be thinking about this comprehensively. So category number one is really on elevating that food quality.
Yeah, I struggle as a consultant with that, of people thinking we want to talk about what we're doing in independent living, and then we can talk about AL and memory care. And for me, my approach has always been, you want them moving through your continuum. Like, you can't separate the two. So that focus, I think, is so important. And I'm glad you guys are really eyeing that.
Absolutely. Ironically, as we were developing Restaura, I was fortunate. My wife and I had our 10-year anniversary. We found ourselves at 11 Madison Park. And of course, everyone was asking about the culinary experience, and certainly it was very high. But the one noticeable thing for me is that it was the service standards that really set it apart. It was that hospitality aspect. So that's why I really advocated that our second pillar was around hospitality and elevating the experience. So you go in expecting that the food is great at a 3 Michelin star restaurant, but really what sets it apart is the way that the service is set out. So things like shifting from routine into celebration, and this whole idea around dignity and connectivity is really important. But how can we get residents not just to dine at the community, but dine in a communal environment and come to the dining room and have this experience? How can we think about tableside or bedside, or how can we think about engaging and adjusting the menus based on resident feedback? And how about presentation? Even when we think about the plating aspect, again, thinking about the continuum of care, whether you got the straight compartment plates or you're during a puree, or maybe you're in the aisle main dining room where you have more of an ability to do an elegant restaurant style. But again, we eat with our eyes, with our senses before we even get the flavor profile. So thinking about that service experience is the second category.
Yeah, so important. The fact that it's not just the food, right? All of the senses have to be hit for the true experience. So tell us a little bit more about the last 3 core domains.
Yeah, so the last 3 are around wellness and nutrition. And I mentioned that at the top, that we don't want to necessarily just go through the process of, okay, we need a menu spread and we need the renal diet, the memory care, and all those other sorts of things. But how can we embrace larger bodies of research, things like the blue zones or lifestyle medicine and menus of change? How can we deliver a balanced meal across the portfolio? So wellness-driven nutrition. Transparency, trust, and culinary innovation is the 4th category. So thinking about where are we sourcing our ingredients from? How are we celebrating technology? How are we bringing these experiences to life, not just in the dining room, but how are we able to quantify and capture that from an impact perspective? How do, the family members at home, how can they check in on mom and dad and see how, they're eating or what their experiences are like? And then lastly, the 5th category is around active aging through food and community engagement. Really, this goes to what that true experience is like. And, we ask whether it's a CEO or an administrator doing a self-assessment or an evaluator to actually sit in the dining room and experience the food program from the perspective of the resident. What are you seeing? What are you feeling? What are you tasting? What is your engagement like? And are we really pursuing this idea of active aging versus aging in place? Are we thriving in the environment, or are we just moving through a routine? So, category 5 is really where the rubber meets the road. It's great that we've got all these programs and standards in place, but are we activating them when it comes down to the real moment of service?
Yeah, that thriving versus surviving is something that I think when it comes to dining and that experience, a lot of non-culinary experts or non-culinary administrators, leaders, don't necessarily think about. They're like, how do we meet numbers? How do we get 3 meals out? How do we get the nuts and bolts of dining going, and not really thinking about you've got to go to that next level? Because I think we all know about this change and shift in demographics, right? We know we're starting to get boomers who are old enough to really start getting into senior living. It's going to happen over the next 12, 18 months for sure. And so we have to start now getting prepared for their expectations. So when you think about all the work that you and the team at Restaura has done around these standards, how does this address those expectations for those incoming seniors?
For over a century, Benny Keefe has been a trusted leader in the food service industry. As a broadline distributor, we offer an extensive selection of products, delivering to 21 states through 10 distribution centers. We can help you create a thriving culinary culture by pairing quality products with customized solutions that elevate your residents' dining experience. Our team of registered dietitians provide unmatched customer service by modifying menus, selecting recipes, ensuring regulatory compliance, and more. Quality, value, and service are at the heart of everything we do. Benny Keefe Foods puts the care back in healthcare.
The vast majority of my career, I've been an advocate for something I call culinary inclusivity. And when I say that, I mean, we have to think comprehensively about everyone experiences food differently. Whether it's someone that has a food allergy, or maybe they've got a sensitivity, maybe they're a celiac, maybe they just prefer a certain lifestyle, or maybe they've grown up in a certain, ethnicity or a certain culture. My experience with senior living dining is that you've got a core set of residents who are very much about the traditional foods, the mashed potatoes, the meatloaf, the lasagna, all of those sorts of things. So it's very important that we're delivering against those standards and expectations for the resident of today. But at the same time, we need to prepare ourselves for the resident of tomorrow. So how can we think about evolving a comprehensive program? Because you're absolutely right, Aaron. The boomers that are coming in have traveled the world. They've got this global experience. They expect, cultural experiences. So how can we think about not only weaving in the traditional approach to food, but bringing in some of these more inclusive, global flavors and ethnicities? So I think it really is a balance depending on your community and your region and geography of what is that right balance. But we have to certainly look at all of the constituents and really engage our dining committees and making sure that we've got that balance right.
Yeah, it's going to be important. And I love you brought up the regionality, because that's something that I've experienced in a number of different roles, where having spent time in the Midwest versus now I'm in Texas, there's a very different expectation. But also I think that people are moving from regions. And so now you've got to have a much broader expectation of what your dining program can meet for them. It's a very important way to look at what our seniors need. So as you think about the totality of the program, one of the things you had mentioned was the plate of distinction. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the thinking behind that, what is driving that, and how that is going to, hopefully from your perspective, have an impact on how operators approach food service in the coming years.
Yeah, so as we stood up these standards, it was a bit of an evolutionary process. We started with, first we need to develop a standard. What is the high watermark, or where are we going to say aspirationally we really want to see senior living, reach this threshold? And as we came upon these standards and started to develop them, we felt it was really important to give people a pathway to look at their community comprehensively and say, where are we at today? Where do we want to be? And then what's that goal setting and that journey to get us to where we want to be? So after we created the standards, we said, let's create this self-assessment where people can go in privately, view the standards, rank themselves against it. And if there's opportunities there, they can say, well, I think these are the areas that we should really be driving our community to look at. And once we completed the self-assessment, we looked at a couple of the pilot programs and the beta tests that we had done. And we said, there's quite a bit of variety here. There are some that are on the precipice where they're just beginning their journey and they've got a longer roadway to go. And then, frankly, we visited some and they were operating at the top threshold of the criteria. We said, because there's such a wide spectrum here, Well, let's offer some sort of recognition program where people can say, hey, I'm going to post this plate of distinction in my dining room, at my community, at my welcome center, by the concierge. I'm going to use it in all my marketing materials so that as I'm looking for prospective residents to come to my community, we can say, I'm an ICAA gold or platinum member, and we're achieving at the top threshold. With Restaura, we actually did a independent research project where we went out and through the age of majority asked a number of senior living communities and seniors and residents within those communities, what was the factor in choosing to live in this community? And what we've heard is that 80% said that dining was one of the main factors of why they chose to live there. And we asked another question, which was related to what's your trust level in your community to delivering against that expectation? And only 17% trusted their community to deliver against that. So we said there's a huge gap here between expectations and delivering. Let's help people benchmark where they are to achieve their goals and to meet the resident of tomorrow so that we can start to bring them into our community. So that was really the emphasis and why we decided the plate of distinction was really important.
Those numbers do not surprise me, right? Because I hear constantly that, well, residents are dissatisfied. They're not happy with what we're doing. But on the flip side, I know that I always say this, and I know that I've read it somewhere and you just reconfirm it. Dining is a top 3 satisfier in a community. Yeah, it can look pretty. Care is going to be important. Location, all those things are important. But food is where they make contact with the community, with the staff, at least 2 or 3 times a day, maybe more, depending upon care level. And so that interaction has to be at the forefront of everything else happening in the community. It has to be a driver. I know I'm biased in that, but so be it, right?
I completely agree. I'm right there with you, Aaron.
So when you think about the way the assessment was put together and you think about working through that, I guess maybe give us like a short little blurb about how a community who's maybe starting out could use an assessment like yours to get themselves on track.
So I would certainly start with why go on this journey, right? Change is hard. The status quo and moving in a new direction is often unsettling for folks. So I think having a very candid conversation around generations are evolving, expectations are increasing. Like let's think creatively about how we prepare our community for tomorrow. So I think that's a great place to start. I would also encourage participants not just to use the self-assessment as a checklist to say, yes, we're doing this or no, we're not, but let's look critically and say, are there areas of opportunity? Again, it's a self-assessment. It's not reported out publicly. It's an opportunity to goal set. And the idea here is not to aim for perfection, but to aim for progress, right? And there's quite a few self-assessment questions that have a continuum. Where along this continuum are you? Are you at 5 to 10%, 10 to 20%, 20 to 30%. Where are you within that continuum? It may not be right for you and your community to be at 30%. Maybe the right number for you is at 15%, which is totally fine. There's other areas for you to look at that assessment and continue to game plan. So I would say start with the why, critically look at where you are, use some goal setting exercises. Frankly, there will be a number of webinars and some other resources that will be available through the ICAA as this program continues to roll out. So if there are specific areas that a given community would like additional resourcing or feedback or training, or, what have you, there will be some additional content coming out. And I would encourage your listeners to check out those opportunities on the ICAA website.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I'm glad you said that, right? Because I think what I didn't say at the start of the podcast is that you guys are kind of right now in the middle of pulling this all together and rolling this out. I was able to look at the standards, the core principles that's out there. I know the assessment is soon coming. And so it's really an exciting time to kind of see all of this start to come out and be available to the industry. So speaking of that, tell us a little bit as we wrap up here, how the listeners can stay connected with the ICAA Culinary Standards of Excellence and how maybe they can learn more about you and Restaura.
Absolutely. Well, I would encourage all your listeners to go to the ICAA website, icaa.cc, to access the standards and learn more. And you'll be able to get the self-assessment tool and view all of the plate of distinction materials. Ironically, the Senior Housing News will have a webinar where we'll be going through all of these details comprehensively. It will be recorded, so you'll be able to find out more. If you're looking for information specifically on Restaura, we could be found at restaura.com. Happy to reach out and to chat with anyone if you're looking for support with any of your dining needs. If you're looking to reach out with me directly, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can go to LinkedIn/IN and then /Chef M as in Matthew Thompson. You can connect with me there. I'll be happy to share any of our feedback or engage with you in any way.
Awesome. Well, Chef, I appreciate your time today and letting us scratch the surface of this exciting program. And again, I'm excited to see how this evolves and how the culinary and hospitality standards of excellence can help not just, you and Restaura, but the industry as a whole, kind of help us all lift that expectation in what we're doing. So it's very exciting to see it coming together.
Thank you, Aaron. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. So there it is, everybody. Another one in the books. Thanks again for tuning in. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestlehospitalityconcepts.com. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.